The colonel's voice carried the way a voice carries when a man has never once worried about being wrong. "Ma'am, this row is for recipients and their party." He said it standing over me, one hand resting on the back of the empty chair beside mine, his blue dress coat pressed to a hard edge, 3 rows of ribbons on his chest and a smile that had nothing kind in it. The hall behind him was full, folding chairs in long, straight ranks, every one of them holding a marine in dress blues, and a stage up front with a podium and a long table draped in cloth, and on that table a flat case the size of a hymnal that I already knew held the thing they had called me here to receive. I looked up at him and said nothing. "You didn't earn this, lady," he said, and now he said it louder because a few heads had turned and he had decided to play to them. "Let's find you a seat in back with the other guests. This section is reserved." My daughter's hand closed on my sleeve. Sadie is 14. She had spent an hour that morning deciding whether the gray dress made me look nice, and she had settled on yes, and she had told me so in the car with the particular fierceness of a girl who has decided her mother is not going to be small today. Now her fingers were tight on my arm, and her face was going red at the edges, and I could feel the question coming up in her before she could stop it. "Do something, Mom? This isn't right." I put my hand over hers to keep her still. I had spent 15 years learning that the loudest man in a room is usually the one who read the least of it. I had learned it the hard way, in a country I do not talk about, and then I had learned it again the slow way, in an office where a man with a clipboard told me what my worst day was worth. So I did the only thing I have ever known how to do with a man like this. I stood up. I smoothed the front of the gray dress with one hand. I did not argue. I did not reach for my purse, where there was a folded card with my name printed on it and the word recipient underneath in small capital letters. I did not point at the program in the colonel's own hand, the one he had not read. I stepped out into the aisle, into the open space where 300 Marines could see me, and I stood there, and I let him have the moment he thought he was winning. 300 Marines watched a colonel move a woman out of her own chair. I did not correct him. Some things you let the paper do. Up at the front, a sergeant major in dress blues crossed to the microphone with a single folded sheet of paper in his hand. He unfolded it slowly, the way you unfold something you intend to read exactly right, and the hall began, row by row, to go quiet. I want to tell you who I was before I tell you what he read. Not because it matters to the story of that room, because it matters to me. In the year 2026, I am a nurse. I work in the emergency department of a hospital in a mid-sized city 3 hours inland from any ocean, and I am good at it. And most days, that is the whole of what anyone needs to know about me. I work 12-hour shifts that turn into 14. I have a locker with a dented door and a badge that unlocks the medication room and a pair of shoes that I bought for standing, and I stand for a living, and I keep people alive for a living, and I am 40 years old. When a car comes apart on the interstate and they bring us what is left of the people who were in it, I am the one the newer nurses look at to know how scared they are allowed to be. When a father carries in a child who is not breathing right, I am the one who takes the child and says the calm, true things and does the fast, exact work. And the father never knows that the reason my hands do not shake is that they were trained not to shake in a place where shaking got people killed. People hand me the worst minute of their lives and expect me not to flinch. I do not flinch. I learned that somewhere I do not talk about. 2 days before the ceremony, I worked a Thursday that would have broken a newer nurse. We had a boy of 6 who had gone under in a backyard pool, and we had a woman my own age whose heart had quit in a grocery store. And we had the ordinary river of the almost fine that runs through a trauma bay on any given day. The broken wrists and the chest pains and the old men who come in alone because they have no one else to be frightened in front of. I ran all of it. When the boy came back, when his color returned and he coughed the pool up onto my arm, his mother grabbed my hand and called me an angel. And I let her, because people need to name the thing that saved their child. An angel is a shorter word than the truth. The truth is that I am a woman who was taught to work in the worst minute of other people's lives by the worst minutes of my own. And there is nothing angelic in it. It is just training and repetition and a decision I make new every shift to walk toward the fire instead of away from it. Because a long time ago, I found out that is the kind of person I am, and you do not get to unknow a thing like that about yourself. Tamsin drove me to my car that Thursday because mine was in the shop. In the parking lot, she asked, the way friends do, whether I had big plans for the weekend, and I said a ceremony, a military thing, an old award finally coming through. She turned in her seat and looked at me. In 6 years, I had given her the outline of a life and almost none of the interior, and she knew it, and she had been kind enough never to push. "What kind of award, Mir?" she asked. And I said, "It is called the Navy Cross." And I watched her not know what that was, which was a mercy. And I said, "It is for something that happened a long time ago." And she nodded and let me keep the door closed, because that is the other way Tamsin loves people, by knowing which doors are not hers to open. My friend Tamsin runs the charge desk on my shifts. She is 44, and she has known me for 6 years, and she thinks she knows me well. And she does, in every way that our life together contains. She knows I take my coffee with too much sugar and that I will trade any shift to be off on a Tuesday, because that is Sadie's late start day at school. She knows I was, in her words, a medic once, in the service, a long time ago. She does not know the 14th of June. Nobody at that hospital knows the 14th of June. I did not build a life around it. I built a life beside it, in a different room, with a door that stays closed. That is why I came to the ceremony in a gray dress. They had offered in the letters to arrange things. They had used the words, full honors and appropriate attire, and somewhere in one of the envelopes there had been a polite paragraph about how a recipient who had separated from the service might wish to acquire or borrow the proper uniform for the occasion. I read that paragraph twice, and then I put the letter down. I did not own a uniform anymore. I had not owned one in 12 years. I owned a gray dress that I wear to funerals and to the 2 or 3 occasions a year that ask for more than scrubs. And I owned a daughter who thought I hung the moon, and when I added those 2 things together, they came out to enough to walk into a room with. Sadie had wanted me to wear something brighter. "Mom, they invited you," she'd said, standing in my bedroom door that morning. "You're allowed to look like you belong." "This is me looking like I belong," I told her. Gray is a color for people who don't need the room to notice them. She had rolled her eyes at me, which is the highest form of love a 14-year-old has in her vocabulary, and she had let me wear the gray. And now she was sitting in the second row, where the ushers had put her when the colonel moved me, watching her mother stand alone in an aisle, and I could see in her face that she was learning something about the world she was going to be angry about for a while, and I was sorry for that, and there was nothing I could do about it in that moment except stand up straight so she would at least be angry about the right thing. We had driven onto the base that morning through a gate with a young Marine sentry who checked my identification against a list on a clipboard, found my name, straightened, and said, "Welcome aboard, ma'am. They're expecting you," and waved us through with something in his voice that I did not think much about at the time. He had read the list. He knew who was on it. It is a small thing, but I have thought about it since, that the 19-year-old at the gate with the clipboard knew exactly who I was and treated me accordingly, and the colonel inside with the eagles on his shoulders did not bother to find out. Rank is not the same thing as attention. Sometimes it is the opposite of it. An usher had walked us to the front and shown me to the chair with the small card on it, the word recipient printed and my name underneath, and I had sat down in it and put my purse under the seat and told Sadie to sit up straight. And for about 11 minutes, I had been exactly where I was supposed to be, in the front row of a hall full of Marines, waiting to be handed a corrected version of my own history. 11 minutes. That is how long I got to simply belong there before a man in a pressed coat decided, without asking anyone, that I did not. I have thought about those 11 minutes, too. How ordinary they felt. How I did not know to treasure them. You never do. Let me tell you about the 14th of June, 2011. I was 25 years old. I was a hospital corpsman 2nd class in the United States Navy, which means I was a sailor, an enlisted one, a petty officer, and it also means that if you had seen me that year, you would have thought I was a Marine because I wore what they wore and I went where they went. I had qualified with the Fleet Marine Force 4 years earlier, and I had been attached to a Marine infantry battalion, and I had deployed with them to Helmand Province in Afghanistan, and to the young men in my platoon, I was not a sailor, and I was not a woman, and I was not a petty officer. I was Doc. That is what they call the corpsman. You do not earn a lot of names in this life that means somebody has decided to trust you with their body. Doc is one of them. On the 14th of June, we were moving in a convoy on a road that everyone hated, a road that had been seeded and cleared and seeded again, and at 1100 hours, a little before noon, the third vehicle in our order struck a buried charge and came off the road and began to burn. I am not going to give you all of it. I have given all of it exactly once, to a board of officers who needed it in a form they could file, and I am not going to perform it for you now. But I will give you enough. The blast did what those blasts do. The vehicle was on its side, and it was on fire. And there were 4 men inside it, and one of them was screaming, and 3 of them were not making any sound at all, and we were still being shot at from a compound off to the north the whole time. I was in the vehicle behind. I remember the door, and I remember the heat coming off the wreck like a wall you could lean on, and I remember that my body went toward it before my mind had voted on the matter, because that is what the training does. It votes for you. It gets you moving while the reasonable part of you is still filing an objection. I got 4 of them out. I went into the smoke, and I got them out one at a time, and for the one whose blood would not stay inside him, I put my hands where the bleeding was, and I kept it inside him with my hands and my weight until we could get him lifted. And he lived. His name was Deacon Ruiz. He was a lance corporal, 19 years old, and he lived, and I will come back to him because he is part of why I was standing in that aisle 15 years later. I could not get Cobb out. Corporal Wesley Cobb was 22. He had a way of calling me ma'am when he wanted something and doc when he meant it, and he had shown me a photograph of a girl back home so many times that I could have described her freckles. He was the 5th man, and by the time I could reach where he was, there was no getting him out, and I stayed with him anyway until staying was the only thing left that I could do for him, and then I could not even do that. I have carried the arithmetic of that day for 15 years. 4 and 1. 4 out, 1 not. 4 and 1. It does not get better with rounding. I was wounded that day, too, though I did not notice it for some time, which is a common thing and not a brave one. I worked the rest of the contact with a piece of the vehicle in my leg and did not know it until a Marine pointed at my boot, which was full. That is in the citation, I would learn later. I did not put it there. Somebody who was watching me put it there. When we came home, they put me in for the Navy Cross. I want to be careful here because I have watched people tell this part of a story badly, with too much bitterness, and bitterness is a poison that mostly kills the person carrying it. So I will tell it plainly. The Navy Cross is the 2nd highest award the Naval Service gives for valor. There is one thing above it, and you know the name of that one. My company commander, a captain then, put me in for the cross, and he wrote it up, and then he was rotated out and wounded himself in a different action, and the packet went into the machine. And the machine that year, in that command, decided that a corpsman pulling Marines out of a burning vehicle was a corpsman doing her job. There was a staff officer. I will not name him because his name is not the point, and I have worked hard not to keep it. He called me into an office, and he told me that the award was being approved at a lower level, that I would receive the Bronze Star with the Combat Distinguishing Device, the little bronze letter V that means valor, and that I should be proud of it. And when something moved in my face, he said the sentence I have carried next to the arithmetic for 15 years. It's a strong award for what it is, he said. Don't overreach, petty officer. Don't overreach. As though reaching into a burning vehicle 4 times had been a kind of ambition. As though I had asked for something by living through it. I signed for the Bronze Star. I stood in a smaller room than the one I was standing in 15 years later, and a different officer pinned it on me and said good things. And I said thank you, and I meant the thank you the way you mean it, when you have decided that meaning it is cheaper than the alternative. And then I finished my enlistment. And in the year 2014, I separated from the Navy, and I took the education benefit I had earned, and I went to nursing school, and I stopped counting on anyone ever to see it right. The years after I got out were not dramatic, and I will not dress them up. I moved to a city where I knew no one, and I went to nursing school with a lot of people 10 years younger than me, and I was pregnant partway through with a man who did not stay, which is its own small war that I fought and finished and do not regret. Because the casualty list of that one came out to 0, and the gain came out to Sadie. I studied at night with a baby on my chest. I learned the civilian words for things I already knew how to do with my hands. I passed my boards. I took the first job that would have me, nights, in an emergency department that chewed up new nurses, and I did not get chewed up, because I had been somewhere that made an American emergency department feel survivable. And within 2 years, the charge nurses were putting the hardest cases in my hall on purpose. I want to say one more thing about the medal before I say the last thing, because people ask me, the few people who know where I keep it, as though the answer will tell them something. It is in the top of my closet, in its flat case, next to the gray dress. I do not have it framed on a wall. I do not wear it. On the 14th of June each year, I take it out and I hold it and I say 5 names to an empty room, 4 who came home and 1 who did not, and then I put it back. That is the whole of the ceremony that matters to me now, and there is no colonel in it, and no hall, and no 300 Marines. There is just a woman in a small house holding a piece of metal that finally says the right thing, saying 5 names, and then going to make her daughter breakfast. The public ceremony corrected the record. The private one, the one with the 5 names, is the one that keeps me honest about what the record is actually for. It is not for me. It was never really for me. It is for the names. I built a life with a closed door in the middle of it. Behind the door was the 14th of June and the drawer with the photograph and the smaller room in 2012, where a man told me not to overreach. In front of the door was everything else. Sadie's first steps and her first day of school in the apartment we outgrew and the small house we did not, the ordinary enormous business of raising a person and keeping strangers alive. I did not talk about what was behind the door. I did not think I was hiding it, exactly. I thought I was being disciplined about it, the way you are disciplined about a scar, keeping it covered not out of shame, but because it is nobody's to look at. And underneath all of it, so quiet I did not hear it for years, ran a single sentence like a wire in a wall. Don't overreach. I had let a tired staff officer in a bad year hand me a verdict on my own worth, and I had carried his verdict as though it were the finding of a court, and I had built a whole life that was careful never to reach for anything that might get me told, again, that I had reached too far. I wore gray. I sat in the back. I let louder people have the chair. I called it humility. It was not humility. It was a man's voice in an office 15 years gone, telling me to be grateful for less than I earned, and me obeying him long after he had forgotten I existed. I want you to understand that this was not a wound that bled. It was a wound that scarred over clean and let me walk. For years, I thought I had made complete peace with it. I had a good life. I had Sadie. I had work that mattered and asked nothing of my history. If you had told me in the year 2023 that a medal was going to make me cry on my own kitchen floor, I would have told you that you had the wrong woman, that I had put all of that away in a drawer with a photograph, and I only opened it on the 14th of June each year for a few minutes, alone, and then closed it again. I was wrong about the peace. I had made peace with the Bronze Star. I had not made peace with being told what I was worth. Those are different pieces, and I did not know it until the phone rang. It rang in the autumn of the year 2025, and it was Deacon Ruiz. He was a gunnery sergeant now. The lance corporal I had kept alive with my hands had stayed in the Marine Corps and grown up inside it and become a gunnery sergeant, 38 years old, with a wife and a house and, he told me, a habit. Every time he re-enlisted, every time he stood up in front of younger Marines and raised his hand, he told the story of the 14th of June. He told them about the corpsman who came into the fire. He had been telling my story for 15 years to rooms I was not in, and at some point he told me a master sergeant who heard him tell it had asked the obvious question, "What did she get for that?" And Ruiz had said the Bronze Star, and the master sergeant had frowned, and that frown had started something. They had gone and found my old company commander. He was a retired lieutenant colonel now, Roy Ambrose, 61 years old, living in Virginia with the leg that action had left him, and he had never known, all those years, that the award he wrote up had been cut down after he was carried off. When Ruiz called him and told him, Ambrose, by Ruiz's account, was quiet for a long time, on the phone, and then said one sentence. "We are going to fix that." They gathered the statements that had been missing in 2012. The ones from the men who were inside the vehicle, the one from the gunner whose blood I kept inside him, who had never been asked, all those years, to write down what my hands had done. They found the after-action report and the imagery and the 2 Marines from the vehicle behind who had watched me go in and come out and go in again. They built the packet that should have been built the first time, and they sent it into the machine again. And this time the machine looked at it and did what it should have done in 2012. The board upgraded the award to the Navy Cross. "Doc," Ruiz said on the phone, and his voice was not the voice of a gunnery sergeant then. It was the voice of a 19-year-old I had last heard, making a sound I still hear sometimes at 3 a.m. "I have told this story at every re-enlistment I ever did. This time, somebody with a stamp finally wrote it down. The board upgraded it. It's the cross." I had to sit down on my own kitchen floor. I want to be honest about that because I spent 15 years being composed, and I do not want you to think composure is the same as being fine. I slid down the front of my own cabinets with the phone against my ear, and I sat on the floor where I feed my daughter breakfast, and I cried in a way I had not let myself cry since a country I do not talk about. And Deacon Ruiz stayed on the line the whole time and did not say anything, because he is a man who learned a long time ago that sometimes the only thing you can do for somebody is not hang up. The official letter came 3 weeks later, on heavy paper with a seal, and it said in the flat, careful language of the service that the previous award was rescinded and superseded, that the Navy Cross had been approved, that a ceremony would be arranged at my convenience. I read it standing at my kitchen counter, and then I read it again, sitting down, and then I put it in the drawer with the photograph, which is the first time anything new had gone into that drawer in a very long time, and it did not fit the shape of what was already in there, and I understood that the drawer was going to have to be reorganized, that the story I kept in it was changing while it sat there. I told Sadie that night. I did not tell her all of it, but I told her enough that a medal I should have gotten a long time ago was finally being given correctly, and that I wanted her to come with me when they did it. She asked why I never told her, and I said because it lived in a drawer, and she looked at me the way she does when she has decided I am being a grown-up about something I should be a person about, and she said, "Maybe it's tired of the drawer, Mom. 14 years old. Maybe it is tired of the drawer." I did not tell anyone at work. Roy Ambrose called me twice in those weeks, from Virginia, and we talked in the shorthand of people who were in the same fire, and he told me what it had taken to reopen the file, the statements he had chased down, the gunner I had kept alive who wept on the phone when Ambrose finally found him and asked him to write down what happened, because in 15 years no one had ever asked him, and he had assumed that meant it did not count. "They lost the paper, Doc," Ambrose said. "That's all it ever was. Not a judgment. A lost piece of paper and a bad year and a staff officer covering for both. It was never that you didn't earn it. It was that the earning got misfiled." I did not answer him for a moment because he had put his thumb on the exact place it hurt, the difference between not earning a thing and having the earning of it lost, and how for 15 years I had let myself believe the first when the truth was only ever the second. I almost did not go to the ceremony. I want to tell you that too, because I think it is the part that people who have not lived it do not understand. When you have made a smaller life, fit around a wound, being offered the thing you were denied does not feel only like a gift. It feels like a risk. It feels like being asked to walk back into the exact room where they told you not to overreach, and stand at the front of it, and let them look at you. I had gotten good at not being looked at. The gray dress was armor against being looked at. I called the point of contact on the ceremony letter twice to decline, and both times I hung up before it rang through. I told myself practical lies. It was a long drive. I could not get the time off, which was not true. I had the time. Sadie had school, which was not a real obstacle, and I knew it. Underneath the practical lies was the real one, the one I could barely look at, which was that I was afraid. Not of the drive or the crowd. I was afraid that I would walk into that hall to be handed the thing I had earned, and that some part of me, the part that had listened to a staff officer for 15 years, would be standing there waiting and would lean over and whisper that I did not deserve it, that they had made a mistake, that any moment now someone would realize and take it back and tell me one more time not to overreach. I was afraid the ceremony would not fix the wire in the wall. I was afraid it would just be one more room where I had to manage my own smallness in public. That is the thing about a verdict you have carried too long. You start to protect it. You start to be afraid of the evidence that would overturn it, because the verdict has become the floor you stand on, and even a floor made of a lie is a floor. It was Sadie and Tamsin who pushed gently in their different ways. Tamsin said, "You are going, and you are taking your girl, and that is the end of the discussion," which is how Tamsin loves people. And Sadie said, quieter, one night at the kitchen table, "I want to be in the room, Mom. I want to see it." And that was the thing I could not say no to. Not the medal. The chance for my daughter to see her mother be told the truth in public. So I told them I would come, but I would not perform. I would wear my own clothes. I would sit where they put me and stand when they called me and let them read whatever they were going to read. And then I would take my daughter home and go back to work on Monday. I did not come to be a hero. I came to be in the room when they finally read it right, so that Sadie would know it was real, so that it would live somewhere other than a drawer. And then a colonel who had not read the program looked at a woman in a gray dress and decided she did not belong in the front row. Standing in that aisle, I felt the old reflex come up in me like water. The reflex is to make it easy on the room, to smile at the colonel and lower my eyes and let myself be walked to the back and be the woman who got confused about her seat so that nobody would be embarrassed, so that the ceremony could go smoothly, so that I would not be a problem. I had done that for years. I did it in the office in 2012. I did it at 100 smaller tables since. It costs less, in the moment, to shrink. It always costs less in the moment. It also costs everything, over enough moments. You give away an inch at a time, and one day you look up and you are standing in the back of the room of your own life. An usher, a young lance corporal in white gloves, appeared at my elbow with an apologetic face and gestured toward the rear of the hall. "Ma'am, if you'll come with me, we'll get you a good seat." Up at the podium, the presiding officer had come to the microphone. He was a major general, 2 silver stars on each shoulder, a big, weathered man of about 58 named Thorne, and he had a program in his hand, and he was looking down at the front row, and I watched him find the empty chair where a recipient was supposed to be, and I watched him not find the recipient. I saw him lean slightly toward the aide at his side, and I could not hear it, but I could read it. "Where is she? Where is Petty Officer Vaughn?" The lance corporal touched my elbow again. "I'll wait right here, thank you," I said. I said it calmly, in the voice I use in the trauma bay when the room is coming apart and one steady voice is the only medicine I have. "They're about to call me." I did not walk to the back. I decided, standing in that aisle, in my gray dress, that I was done leaving rooms to make men comfortable. I would not shout the colonel down. I would not wave my card. I would just be standing there, in plain sight, when the truth arrived, and I would let it arrive on its own terms, and not on mine, and not on his. Major General Thorne's eyes came down the aisle and found me. I watched him take it in, the woman standing where the colonel had put her, the gray dress, the empty chair. I watched the pieces connect behind his face, and then I watched something else move there, something that was not about me at all, a slow understanding of what he had just walked into the middle of what he was about to make right and what had almost gone wrong. He leaned to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, and his voice filled the hall and stopped every small sound in it. "Our recipient is already on her feet." He paused. "Petty Officer Vaughn, front and center, please." I have thought a great deal about the colonel's face in the 2 seconds after Thorne said my name. I did not turn to look at it then. I did not need to. But I have imagined it many times since, because I think there is a particular education that happens in a man's face, in the space between hearing a name and understanding a name, and I think he received the whole of that education in about 2 seconds, standing next to the empty chair he had cleared of me. The woman he had called a lady who did not earn this was the recipient. The front row was, in fact, reserved. It had been reserved for me. I walked to the front. I walked the length of the aisle he had ordered me down, past the rows of Marines in dress blues, and I kept my eyes forward and my back straight, and the only sound in that hall was the sound of my own funeral shoes on the floor. It is a strange thing to walk toward the front of a room you were just ordered to leave. Every step was the reversal of a step I had taken the other way a few minutes before, and I could feel the room understanding it in real time, the way a crowd understands a turn in a story a half second before it is finished, the intake of breath that runs along a row of people when they realize what they are watching. I did not hurry, and I did not slow down. I walked the way I walk into a trauma bay, at the one steady pace that tells everyone around you that the situation now has an adult in it. I had spent 15 years learning that pace. It turns out it is the same pace whether you are walking toward a dying stranger or toward the front of a hall to be handed back your own name. You just put one foot down, and then the next, and you do not let the room set your tempo. You set it. Sadie, I learned afterward, had both her hands over her mouth. Deacon Ruiz, 3 rows back, was already starting to rise. I reached the front and I stood where they showed me to stand, facing the hall, and Major General Thorne stepped back from the podium and he nodded to the sergeant major. His name was Luther Pace. He was 54 years old, and he had a chest full of his own history and a voice like a foundation stone, and he lifted the single folded sheet of paper and he read, "The President of the United States takes pride in presenting the Navy Cross to Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Meredith Vaughn, United States Navy, for extraordinary heroism in connection with combat operations against the enemy." And then he read the rest. He read the date, the 14th of June, 2011. He read the road and the convoy and the buried charge and the vehicle that came off the road and burned. He read that Petty Officer Vaughn, with complete disregard for her own safety and under continuous enemy fire, moved from a position of cover into the burning vehicle. He read that she extracted 4 wounded Marines in succession. He read that she manually controlled the hemorrhage of one gravely wounded Marine, sustaining his life by direct pressure while exposed to enemy fire, and that the Marine survived. He read that she continued to render aid after sustaining a penetrating wound to her own leg, which she did not report until the engagement had ended. He read that she remained with a mortally wounded Marine until his death, refusing to leave him. He read that her actions were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. He read it slowly, the way you read something you do not want to get wrong. And I stood there in my gray dress, and I heard the 14th of June come back into a room, out loud, correctly, for the first time in 15 years. I heard my worst day described by a man who had not been there in words that were finally the right size. I did not cry, though I will tell you it was close. What I felt was not triumph. What I felt was the strange, enormous quiet of a thing being set down in the right place after you have carried it wrong for a very long time. I had rehearsed in the weeks before a kind of armor for this moment. I had told myself that it would just be words, that I had lived the real thing and words could not touch it, that I would stand there politely while a stranger read a paragraph and then I would go home. I was wrong about that, the way you are always wrong about the armor you build in advance. Because it was not just words. It was my platoon's worst day, spoken aloud in a room full of people who understood exactly what each phrase cost. Under continuous enemy fire, meaning what it means. Extracted 4 wounded Marines, meaning what it means. Remained with a mortally wounded Marine until his death, meaning Cobb, meaning I stayed, meaning the sergeant major was, without knowing it, telling 300 strangers that I had held a dying boy through the last minutes of his life and not let go. You cannot armor against hearing that said correctly. I stopped trying. I let it come. Sadie was crying, openly in the second row, and she did not care who saw. And 6 feet to my left, the colonel who had moved me out of my chair stood frozen. I could feel it. I did not have to look. There is a temperature that a person gives off when the ground has gone out from under them in public, and I could feel him go white and still from 6 feet away, and I felt no joy in it, which surprised me. I had thought in the abstract over the years that if I ever got a moment like this, I would want to watch a man like that suffer. When it came, I did not. I had a medal being read over me and a daughter crying for the right reason and 4 men out of a fire and 1 still in it, and there was simply no room left in me for the colonel's suffering. It was too small a thing to hold on a day that size. Major General Thorne lifted the Navy Cross from the flat case on the table, and 2 hands lowered a ribbon from above and settled the weight of it around my neck, and the medal came to rest against the gray dress, over my heart, exactly where it should have been 15 years earlier. The hall came to its feet. Every Marine in it, all 300, stood. The men who had, 4 minutes earlier, watched a colonel tell me I did not belong in my own chair were now on their feet, with their eyes forward and their hands at their sides, standing for the woman in the gray dress. I stood at the front and let them stand, and I thought, in a clear, cold voice inside my own head, there it is. The arithmetic finally balances, 4 and 1 and 300 on their feet, and a name read right. I found Sadie's face in the crowd, and I held it, and she held mine, and that was the whole ceremony as far as I was concerned. The rest was just the room agreeing. Afterward, there was a receiving line, which is a thing they do, and I stood at the end of it and let people come to me, and I shook a great many hands and accepted a great many words, and most of them ran together the way words do on a day like that. But 2 moments from that line I have kept. The first was the colonel. He came to me near the end when the line had thinned, and he stood in front of me stripped of every ounce of the swagger he had carried down the aisle, and he did the one thing that made it possible for me to be decent to him. He did not make excuses. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was not the voice that had filled the room over my chair. It was a smaller, truer voice. "I didn't read the program. I saw what I expected to see, and I said something unforgivable in front of your daughter on the most important day of your life. There is no version of what I said that I can defend, and I'm not going to try. I'm sorry." His name was Desmond Hale. He was a colonel, and I was a woman who had been out of the service for 12 years and owed him nothing. And I looked at him for a moment, and I understood that he had just handed me a knife and was standing very still to see whether I would use it. The whole room, half watching, wanted me to use it. There is a version of me from 15 years ago that would have wanted to use it too. "You didn't read the program," I said. "That's the whole of it, Colonel. You saw a woman in a dress and you filled in the rest yourself." I let that sit for 1 second because it was true and he needed to hear it land. And then I let him off the hook because he had not asked me to. I've had 15 years to think about men who fill in the rest themselves. You just apologized without being made to. That's rarer than you'd think. We're all right. He did not ask me to forgive him, and that was the only reason I could. If he had asked, If he had made it about the weight coming off his own conscience, I do not think I would have had it in me, but he stood there and took the fact of what he had done and did not try to make me carry any of it for him. And a man who can do that is a man you can afford to be gentle with. I have learned that being gentle from a position of strength is a different act entirely than being gentle because you are afraid. I was not afraid of Colonel Hale. That is what let me be kind to him. There had been a younger officer, a captain, standing near Hale when he moved me, and this captain had smirked. I had caught it out of the corner of my eye in the aisle, the small superior curl of a man enjoying watching a superior put a woman in her place. He came through the receiving line, too, and he did not smirk now. He was the color of a man who has realized that the person he laughed at is going to exist in his memory for the rest of his career, as the moment he learned something about himself he would rather not have learned. He started to say something, some apology of his own, and I did not need it and I did not want it, so I simply said, "Read the program next time, Captain," and shook his hand and moved him along, and I watched him carry that sentence out the door with him. I hope he carries it a long time. Not out of cruelty, because he is young and there is still time for the lesson to make him better instead of just embarrassing him. And the lesson is a good one. Read the program. Find out who someone is before you decide who they are. The whole of what went wrong in that hall fits inside those two small instructions. The second moment was Ruiz. He came through the line last, on purpose, waiting so he would not have to share it. Deacon Ruiz, gunnery sergeant, 38 years old, the boy from the truck. He is a big man now, broad through the shoulders, with gray already coming in at his temples, and he stood in front of me and he could not speak. His jaw worked, and nothing came out, and behind him came Roy Ambrose, leaning on a cane, the leg from that action finally catching up with him at 61, and Ambrose reached past Ruiz and simply took my hand and gripped it and held it, saying nothing either, because between the three of us there was nothing that needed to be said that the sergeant major had not already said into a microphone. Finally, Ruiz got it out. "You got me out of that truck, Doc," he said. "It only took the rest of us 15 years to get you out of that chair." And then the gunnery sergeant put his arms around me and held on, and I felt the whole of the 14th of June pass between us. All of it. The fire and the smoke and the blood I kept inside him and the boy he had been and the man he had made. And I held on to him too. And for a moment we were not two middle-aged people at a ceremony. We were a corpsman and her Marine, and both of us had lived, and one of us had made sure of the other. And it is the closest thing to family that this life ever gave me. Later, when the hall had mostly emptied, I found Cobb. Not Cobb himself. Cobb has been gone 15 years, but they had a board near the front with the names on it, the men from that battalion who did not come home, and Corporal Wesley Cobb was on it, and I stood in front of his name for a long time with the Navy Cross heavy against my chest. I want to tell you the truest thing I know, and I learned it standing in front of that name. They can upgrade a medal. They cannot upgrade a life. The board that met in 2025 could reach back 15 years and correct a piece of paper, and I am grateful. I am. But there is no board in the world that can meet and correct the fact that Cobb was 22 and had a girl back home with freckles I could describe and a whole life that did not happen. The Navy Cross does not weigh as much as Cobb weighed coming out of that truck. Nothing does. I put my hand flat on the board under his name, and I told him silently that I had stayed as long as I could, which he knew, and that I was sorry it was not longer, which he had forgiven me for a long time ago, in the way that the dead forgive us by not being here to hold it against us. There was a woman at the name board when I got there, older, in her 60s, in a good Navy dress, and she was standing in front of Cobb's name with her hands folded, and I knew before she turned who she was, because Cobb had his mother's jaw. I had written to her once, in 2011, the letter you write, and she had written back, and then the years had done what the years do to letters between strangers, held together by a dead boy. Her name was Ellen. She had driven in from 2 states away when the command found her and told her that the corpsman who was with her son at the end was finally being decorated and that some of the citation was about him. We stood in front of his name together. I told her the parts a mother can hold, which are not all of the parts, and I left out the parts that are mine to carry and not hers, and I told her the one thing I had wanted to tell her for 15 years, which is that Wesley was not alone, that somebody who loved him in the way you love people in that place was holding on to him the whole time, that he did not go into the dark by himself. She put her hand over her mouth and nodded and did not speak for a while, and then she said, "They gave you a medal for staying with him." And I said, "They gave me a medal for a lot of things. Staying with him was the only one that felt like it was worth anything." She took my hand then, the way Ambrose had, and held it. and I understood that the medal around my neck belonged partly to her, that a piece of every valor award ever pinned belongs to some mother standing in front of a name, and that this is a thing the ceremonies do not quite know how to say, but that everyone in the room somehow knows anyway. Sadie found me there. She came and stood next to me and read the name, and she did not ask who it was, because she is smart and she could see what the name was to me. She just leaned her head against my shoulder, and we stood there together in the emptying hall, my daughter and I, in front of the name of a boy who died before she was born. "Is that why you never talk about it?" she asked, finally. "Some of it," I said. "You should talk about it more," she said. "It's a good thing. What you did." I put my arm around her. "I didn't come here to be proven right, baby," I told her. "I came so you'd see it, so it would live somewhere other than a drawer in my head." I looked down at her, at this person I had made who thought I hung the moon and had spent the morning making sure my dress said so. "And I came so you'd know something. It's allowed to take up your space. Whatever room you're ever in, you're allowed to be in the front of it. Don't let anybody with a loud voice move you to the back. Not ever. Not even if it's easier. Especially not if it's easier." She nodded against my shoulder. "I do not know how much of it landed. You never know, with a 14-year-old, how much of it landed. You say the true thing anyway, and you trust that it goes in somewhere and waits." Major General Thorne caught me before we left. He was kind, and he was careful, and he said the thing that senior people say when they have found someone they would like to use well, which is that the naval service would be honored to have me speak. Re-enlistments, Corps birthday balls, recruit graduations, a woman with a Navy Cross and a story like mine, he said, could do a great deal of good standing in front of young people in uniform. I thanked him because he meant it kindly, and then I told him no. "I already have a job where people bleed and I keep them alive," I said. "I'm just allowed to do it in scrubs now, and I have a daughter with a late start on Tuesdays." He looked at me for a moment, and then he smiled. A real one, and he said, "That's the right answer, petty officer. I had to ask. But that's the right answer." And he shook my hand, and he let me go. And I have thought since that a general who knows when to let someone go is a rarer thing than a general who knows how to keep them. I understood the shape of what he was offering, and I understood that for some people it would have been the right ending, the natural one, the woman restored to the institution that had wronged her, standing at its podiums, its living proof of its own capacity to correct itself. There are people for whom that would be healing. I have thought honestly about whether I am one of them, and I am not. The institution did not owe me a stage. It owed me an accurate piece of paper, and it had finally produced one, and that squared the account. I did not need to become a story the Marine Corps tells about itself. I had a story I was already telling with my own life, in a trauma bay, 3 hours inland, and it did not require a uniform or an audience, and it was mine in a way that a podium never could be. I did not want back into that world. I want to be clear about that, because I think people expect this story to end with me returning, vindicated, to the uniform, taking my rightful place. It does not end that way. I made my peace with the uniform world a long time ago, and part of that peace was leaving it. What had been broken was not that I left. What had been broken was that I left carrying a lie about my own worth, and the ceremony did not call me back. It just took the lie out of my hands so I could keep going lighter. There was one more person on the way out. A young sailor, a hospitalman, 19 or 20 years old, in her dress uniform, standing near the doors with the particular stillness of someone who has been working up the courage to approach a stranger for the last 20 minutes. Her name tape said Byron. She was a corpsman. New. You can always tell the new ones. They wear the uniform like they are still asking it permission. "Ma'am," she said. "Petty Officer Vaughn. I'm sorry, I'm a corpsman. I'm going to the fleet in the spring. FMF. She stopped, embarrassed, having run out of the sentence before she reached whatever she had come to say. I knew exactly what she had come to say, because I had been her, standing near the door of a room, unsure whether I was allowed to want the thing I wanted, unsure whether the uniform was really mine, or whether someone was going to appear at any moment and tell me I had overreached. "Byrne," I said, "you take care of your Marines and they'll take care of you, but I'm going to tell you the one thing I wish somebody had told me." I leaned in a little, because it mattered, because I have carried it for 15 years and I have wanted, all that time, to hand it to somebody who could use it. When they tell you you're just the corpsman and someday somebody will, when they call you just the doc, or just the girl, or just the medic, you write down what you did anyway. You keep your own record, not for your pride, for the paper, because somebody may need that paper in 15 years, and it is a great deal easier to correct the record when the record exists. Do you understand me?" She nodded, hard, the way you nod when something has gone in and you know it has gone in. "Write it down," I said again, "and stand in the front of the room. You earned the front of the room the day you put that on." She was still standing there when I walked out, and I like to think about that sometimes. A 19-year-old corpsman with a whole fire she does not know about yet waiting somewhere in her future, standing a little straighter than she had been standing an hour before. That is the only kind of monument I have ever wanted. Sadie and I drove home that afternoon. 3 hours, inland, away from any ocean. The Navy Cross was in the glove box in its flat case, because you cannot exactly drive with it on, and Sadie held her phone and did not look at it, and instead she talked, the whole way, about the room and the sergeant major's voice and the way everyone stood. And she made me tell her the parts I had never told her, and I told her more of them than I ever had before, and some of them I could not tell her yet, and she let those ones be. Somewhere around the second hour she fell quiet, and I thought she had gone to sleep. But when I glanced over, she was looking out the window with an expression I did not fully recognize on her, older than 14, and after a while she said, without turning, "I'm going to remember today my whole life." And I said I hoped so, and she said, "Not because of the medal." And I waited, because you wait, when a child is assembling something true. "Because of when he told you to move," she said. "And you stood up and you didn't say anything, and you were right the whole time, and you just let them figure it out." She turned and looked at me. "I didn't know you could win like that. Without yelling, I thought you had to yell." And I had to keep my eyes on the road for a moment, because that was the whole inheritance, right there, the only thing I had actually come to that hall to give her, and she had picked it up off the floor of the day by herself and named it better than I could have. You do not have to yell. You can be right and quiet and let the room catch up. She had learned it at 14 in a single afternoon. It took me the better part of 40 years. We stopped for food at a place off the interstate, and the woman at the counter called me Han and asked if we were coming from something special, seeing the dress, and I said a family thing, and Sadie opened her mouth, and I put my hand on her arm, and she closed it and grinned at me because she understood. Not everything has to be announced. The gray dress was still doing its work. I liked being a woman who had been to a family thing. I went back to work on Monday. I want to end there, in the trauma bay, because that is where I actually live. Tamsin was on the charge desk, and she asked how my weekend was, and I said good quiet, and she said good, and we started the shift. Around 10 in the morning, they brought in a young man off a motorcycle who had met a guardrail, and it was bad, and the room came apart the way it does, and one steady voice was the only medicine any of us had, and I was that voice, and my hands did not shake. Nobody in that room knew about the 14th of June. Nobody knew about the medal in the flat case that was now in the top of my closet at home, next to the gray dress. They just knew that when things came apart, Meredith was steady, and that was all they needed to know about me, and it was enough. It has always been enough. I did not go back to the Navy. I went back to my trauma bay, which had never once, in 8 years, asked me to prove I belonged in it. It just handed me people who were dying and trusted me to keep them alive, which is the only credential that has ever felt fully like mine, because I earn it again every single shift, with my hands the same hands. If you have listened this far, then maybe some of this is yours too, and I want to talk to you directly for a moment before I go. If someone ever told you that you did not earn your place, if someone with a loud voice and a clean coat moved you to the back of a room you belonged in the front of, if someone handed you a smaller version of your own worth and told you to be grateful and told you not to overreach, hear me now. You do not have to shout them down. You do not have to prove it in the moment with your voice shaking while they smirk. That is the fight they want, because it is a fight you cannot win in the 2 minutes they are willing to give you. Instead, keep your record. Write down what you did. Stand where you belong, quietly, and do not walk to the back to make anyone comfortable, and let the truth arrive on its own schedule. It is slower than we want it to be. It is so much slower than we want. It can take 15 years and 2 men who would not let it go, and a sergeant major with a folded piece of paper. But it is, eventually, undeniable. The paper outlasts the smirk. It always has. I earned my chair on the 14th of June, 2011, in the smoke, with my hands 4 times. It only took 15 years for the room to catch up and read it right. I would have kept standing either way.